Awesome. I will share my screen. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us this morning, everybody. I think the big thing we're hoping to talk about today is email reporting frameworks. So this is one thing that I know I've had a lot of success with in the past within Marketing Cloud. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go about reporting, and I'm definitely interested in hearing what other folks on the call are doing for these kinds of solutions. But one thing that I've found a lot of usefulness is appending tracking tags, for lack of a better term, kind of to our send log. And the reason for this is that you've got control at the email send time, both in your individual sends coming out of Marketing Cloud, your promotional sends, your single campaign sends, that kind of everyday stuff, as well as at that ongoing drip campaign level. So in your journeys and on your recurring sends and things of that nature, to really kind of control what variables you want to append to each send. And by doing that, we can kind of categorize the various emails into buckets of maybe our audience, maybe buckets about our products, maybe buckets about our campaign, really whatever you want to track at a high level. So it's a really flexible system. It's a little limited in that there's not a lot of variables we can use. So it really forces you to kind of think really judiciously about what you want to track. So I think it's a really great exercise in trying to figure out, it's very simply like, what do we want to gauge success as for our program overall? And how can we kind of build a framework to allow us to get after that information? So I'm really excited to talk about that in just a couple minutes here. Before that, I do want to run over just other upcoming sessions that we've got. So we are going to have, Marketing Cloud Mondays every Monday. We are going to take a week off. Is it 2 weeks, 3 weeks at this point for Indigenous Peoples Day? So don't be surprised if you see a missing event for that one. But otherwise, we're going to keep going back and forth, and Tim and I will keep supporting this. So if you do have any particular issues that you'd like to walk through, any topics you're interested in, please don't hesitate to let us know. We're always looking to address whatever you're running into in the community. Then I think this session probably is going to spill over into a second one. I figure we'll spend today talking about things at a high level, maybe building a little bit, and then we'll probably end up using the actual reporting, the output, in a second session here. I don't think we're going to get to that today. And then last but not least, I think Tim and I are still working on exactly how we want to set this up. But we are looking at having a Marketing Cloud Monday session the week of Halloween with a little Halloween theme to it. And I think we're hoping to have an in-person session as well, either that week or the week prior to that. So definitely stay tuned as we kind of firm up those details. All right, so for today, we're going to talk about the send log. We're going to kind of discuss that at a high level, what it is, how to configure it. I think this is something we've kind of touched on before, but always good to kind of reinforce those concepts. We're going to talk about the out-of-the-box reporting views. So what does Marketing Cloud offer? And then we're going to brainstorm all together, what are these reporting elements that we want to look for? What would we consider important to kind of track as we send emails across our entire platform? And then we'll get hands-on and we'll start building our framework. And then last but not least, before we break up, I will come back to this slide here with some community resources. Tim has a great blog post up already about how to use the send log in Marketing Cloud. I've got a link here to the official support docs. And then Matus also has a great article out there just on kind of enhancing your send log and taking it that extra step. So we'll come back to this just for folks to screenshot or be able to grab those links if necessary. All right, so I think at a high level, I was hoping to, I'll get a question from Sita here, bandwidth issue. Oh, awesome. All right, yeah, we'd love to have you, Sita, good to be here. So the send log. So our send log within Marketing Cloud, it is something that typically needs to be configured. I had heard that Marketing Cloud may have been pushing it to new customers out of the box recently, but it may not be in your environment. So if you don't see it, you may need to go out and create one. And again, Tim's blog post that I'll link here is great at doing that. But the send log is going to be a data extension that's actually going to be tracking our sends at send time. So unlike a data view where it's kind of a back-end system that's collecting information about a job or about a send or about a subscriber, this is actual send context information that's captured when these emails deploy. And there are going to be some standard fields in there. So I'm going to jump over to just an example, just so we can have something to look at while we're talking through it. Actually, Tim, I'm sorry. Do you happen to know offhand? I should have navigated to this before
Of where our send log is?
Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, so I think if you close hands-on, yeah, and then yeah, that it gets send
Oh,
log there.
awesome. It's got its own folder. Okay, cool. So yeah, so when you configure this, it is a data extension just like any other, but there are some considerations for setting it up. So we're going to be capturing some information about the actual send. So as you can see here, we've got send from name, send from email. These are actually going to be resolved values. So you can populate these at time of email send with what you want these to be populated with. So something like our SF campaign ID, for example, we can populate that value at send time, and it's going to be absorbed by this data extension and stored by this data extension as those emails are deployed. So it's not just information that you can get out of the data views, and that's obviously super helpful as well, right? Our job ID, list ID, batch ID, all of that's going to help us kind of tie back to this after our emails are out. Things like subscriber key, email address, obviously great at identifying context about who the email is going to. And if we look at some examples here, we can grab our dates. So we can see when was this email actually deployed. Trigger or send ID, if this happens to be a triggered send or something coming out of Journey Builder, you'll see that be populated. Then over here, we can see that some of these are going to be blank as well, right? So our send from name, send from email, SF campaign ID, and SF campaign member ID. I think this is really a great example of how these need to be populated at send time, right? This is something that we're going to populate with AMP script in our actual email template in order to make these values available. So without kind of configuring that, without taking that extra step of actually creating that information, it's not going to automatically just be brought in here outside of that kind of job level information. So we really want to think about what's important for us. What do we want to track? How are we going to get this into our email templates? So let's come up with kind of a consistent structure in order for us to do so, because without that, again, we'll either have the wrong information or no information. But I think the real big thing here is that at the end of the day, we can combine this with our data views with other tracking information to get one data set that's really going to allow us to see great, not only who opened, who clicked, but for example, with this campaign ID, we can now track how did campaign A compare to campaign B, whether it's opens, clicks, conversions, whatever we want to end up tracking. And I think campaign is a great example here. So we can say that, we know what our campaign name is going to be. But I'm also thinking about things like, for example, in the financial services world, audience type, right? Are these going to financial advisors? Are they going to members, credit union members? Maybe these are going to our wealth clients or our private clients. My guess is that in each of your organizations, you've got folks who are going to behave a little bit differently based on which kind of slice of your customer base they are. And this send log is a great way to kind of capture that information when the send goes out, so you can kind of compare different emails to each other over time. So with that said, I would love to talk a little bit more about what everyone in the group thinks is, helpful information to track. So what kind of things do we think are going to be important? And we can start just kind of capturing information here and figure out what we want to get back into our send log. So I'm going to open it up. Please feel free to come off of mute or just jump in the chat. What do we think is going to be useful for tracking? And I can start with one, which I think is it a transactional or is it a commercial send? I think that's one thing that I always see a pretty stark difference in my open rates, right? My transactional emails tend to perform a little bit better based on that message going out, while as the commercial ones, we're trying really hard to kind of increase those. So what's that send classification? All right. So who else has an idea for what might be a good thing to track as far as our marketing campaigns or non-marketing emails might be?
Bounce rates?
Yeah, so bounce rates are important. Yeah, absolutely. So I think bounce rates are really good to manage the output of. I think what we're hoping to do here is to try to identify what's a good category that we can report on. So bounces will be important, but I think this would be something like we could compare our bounce rates of our transactional sends versus our commercial sends. So when our emails go out, we'll populate that send classification category with a value. and then we can compare the actual bounces of what happens of one versus the other.
Conversion rates?
Yeah, conversion rates, absolutely. I think that's the same thing. That's more of an output metric. So absolutely, do we want to track our transactional emails versus our commercial emails? What are we getting more conversions across? Absolutely. Contact ID, audience type, yeah, absolutely. So contact ID is something that I think we could populate there, and then audience type I think is a really good example. So if we are a financial services institution, our audience type, we might have a member, we might have a private client, we might have a wealth client, we might have advisors, might have internal folks, right? A lot of people who may be using Marketing Cloud for internal communications, you may want to pull those out, right? We don't necessarily want to, commingle those with our, commercial sense. Is test from Sharon? Absolutely. I think that's a great one. So we can use true and false. That'll help us know whether we want to pull that out. Email template type or more on content, i.e. newsletter. Absolutely. So let's go with content types. We may have a newsletter. We may have a promotion. Maybe something that's ongoing, like a drip campaign. All right, send date, absolutely. So send date and received or not. So I think those are awesome ones. And I think it may be helpful just to back up for a second where we've got our standard fields here. So we're going to have a date. Tim's looks like we've got date populated with the current date and then also date text to have that as well. But we should have, when we combine this with our data views, we're going to have some of this information there as well. So I'm going to pull up the Marketing Cloud job data view. So we should be able to grab, from our job, that information. So what time was that email delivered? So some of these fields we will be able to get from other places, and we will be able to kind of combine them. I believe the SendLog, you're limited to 10 custom fields. So that's one thing we want to think about. What do we want to include and what not? So if something's already available, either in our job or our open or our sent, wherever we're going to join to, probably good to get it from there versus trying to, recreate it within the SendLog. And I see right there, Jeremy saying that absolutely. So we can join on open and click. Yep, absolutely. And I think Danella mentioned bounces earlier, so we will do that as well for sure.
Would that include the click-through rate or no?
Yeah. So what we can do is we can determine, did this person click? We can say, we have the subscriber, we've got the job. We can determine whether they clicked or not, and then we can calculate that click-through rate. And then I think what's helpful is with what we're kind of storing here is we can say, do our newsletters, do we see a higher click-through rate versus our promotional emails? Or, do our members click through more than our advisors? And I can tell you that is something that I've seen in the past, especially with these audience types. In the event that we've got financial advisors that we are mostly communicating just notifications with, engagement isn't really high. They love those emails. They like to get them. They like to have awareness of what's going on, but they're not necessarily actually going through and interacting with them. So that can be really helpful. If that non-activity is suppressing your overall click rates, you can identify it by saying, okay, I want to pull those out of my reporting and let's just look at the members, for example. And all of a sudden that 30% click rate might be jumping up to 40, 45. You can tell that your members are really much more engaged with your content versus some other subsets of your audience. All right, so we've got cost. I think that's a great one as well. Journey and marketing automation type. So welcome onboarding versus cross-sell versus lapsed. Absolutely. So I might consider that something, I don't know if goal's the right word, but I'm going to use that for now. So we've got onboarding, cross-sell, lapsed, engagement segment, 0 to 6 month clickers versus 6 to 12 month. I love that. Customers versus prospects. Okay. I'll put that down. That's subscriber category. Yeah, so channel. So I think channel is a great one to talk about. So I would, and do you mind just expanding on that a little bit? Because when I hear channel, I think email, like email versus SMS versus print, phone, things of that nature. In this case, because we are just dealing with emails, I think the channel is going to all be email. But I am curious if you had a different thought there.
Because sometimes, well, email is definitely one of them, obviously, but isn't there some organic that might be involved?
Yeah, so there could be. So I think this is really helpful to try to, think through up front, right? Because the organic traffic, I'm going to imagine, is coming to your landing page, and you may have
Yeah,
different
that's true.
reporting set up in each of these. So you might have, organic traffic come to your website. You may have social campaigns going that you're trying to measure all this reporting from. So this particular one with our send log is specifically going to be for email send. So I think it would be safe to
Okay.
kind of classify all of this as email, in which case I don't think you would want to create, a channel category. Like it definitely
Okay.
exists. And I think we can tag that, either with like a hard coded value on our reports or something like that. I'm just not sure that we want to create a category here.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
We've got keyword ID. I think that could be helpful. Analytics tracking code. Awesome. All right, so we've got a lot of great values here. So I think I'm going to focus on kind of these top couple here, just because I think it's going to really help us when we get into the reporting, just to kind of categorize. Awesome. All right, cool. So we will jump into Marketing Cloud and we can start populating some of these values and take a look at our emails. So Tim, are you comfortable with me adding a couple of these to your send log? Would you prefer that I replicate that data extension and we'll just kind of, do it in a separate data extension mockup? Any preference on your end?
No, go for it. Thank you.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to pull this off screen. We can jump in. Awesome. So we've got our send log here. We've got some great information. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start adding some fields. For our send classification, I'm going to leave that at 50. I'm going to add these as nullable just because there's already data in here. I'm going to include our audience type. Who is this going to? I'll include this as a Boolean. And our content type. Our goal. We'll include subscriber category. Awesome. All right, so we'll save these real quick. All right, and Sita's got a question in the chat here about what does keyword ID help us with? So Jeremy, I think that suggestion came from you. Do you mind speaking to that a little bit? May not be available, may not be able to come off of mute. So let me take a look. I'm actually not super familiar with that, so let's take a look.
I mean, it could help from attribution. So if it's like a pay-per-click keyword that you're getting that prospect from, and you're looking to track back to your Google Analytics of is that a popular, a good conversion on that keyword? I've seen it in that use case.
Love it. No, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so we have our fields created here, so those are added in. The last thing I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna grab a couple more of these. So in this case, we'll want to grab our send from name, our send from email, SF campaign ID. Email address and subscriber key. All right. So I'm going to grab those for now. And we can start looking at our email about how we're going to actually populate these. Okay, so we'll jump over into Content Builder. So for example, we've got our MTO welcome email here. This is an email that we put together a couple weeks ago. And we'll take a look at our content. So as a group here, as we put this together, this is definitely an onboarding email. I think we're hoping just to let them know that we're happy that they've registered, that they've signed up, they've joined our program. Just kind of letting them know, acknowledging that they have joined and that we're looking forward to working together with them. So as we think back to our categories, we'll want to think about what do we actually want to populate. So I like to get these in here first in an AMP script block. I'll set my variables, and that way I've got it available for every email that I'm going to create moving forward. Definitely important, once you've started this, you want to make sure that you're not only populating values for all of your sends across your program, because otherwise you're going to have gaps in your reporting. But you also want to make sure that you're using consistent values. So in this case, we're working off a Google Drive sheet here. You may want to create some sort of shared spreadsheet with kind of values locked down, where maybe this is a drop-down field and you only have the choice of transactional or commercial. You want to make sure as we go to populate these that we're mindful of any typos, that we're not trying to add values that may not exist in the program without like proper thought. We want to make sure that we're not just kind of making this up as we go once we start, because then you will have very odd results kind of in your tracking program. All right, so I'm going to run through it. I'm just going to create my variables here. So we've got our send classification. Our audience type. All right, is test, content type, goal, and our subscriber category. Got a couple more demographic bits that we're going to pull here. Our sent from name, our sent from email. That's our campaign ID, email address, and subscriber key. Awesome. So once we've got that, we'll get a little bit of separation here, and then we're going to set all of these variables. If there are any questions while we're going through this, please don't hesitate to come off mute and let us know. All right, so now that we've got our variables all set, what we can do is start talking about how we actually want to populate these. So I think I mentioned that some of these we're going to populate by hand, right? So if we've got our audience type, for example, we are going to want to set this to maybe a field in our data extension where we are going to be capturing this information at our list level. Maybe you want to capture it at the email level, right? Maybe we're going to put this in by hand. So if we know that this is going to our members, we can populate that value right there and just populate, hard-coded with a member value. But some of these we're going to be able to grab from either system strings, maybe from our profile strings if it's going to be subscriber level data. Data extensions we mentioned, so we can kind of walk through these one by one and determine how we want to set these, because anything that we're going to be setting by hand is probably not going to be a best practice, because it kind of opens that door for typos, variables kind of coming out of left field. We want to make sure that we're using standard values as much as possible across all of these. So I know our subscriber key is going to be a fairly easy system string to grab, so we can throw a subscriber key in there. Same thing with email address. All right, our send classification. So I think this is probably one that we're going to set by hand. So in this case, when we go to send this, when we think about our onboarding email, this is, I would consider this a transactional email. We're not selling anything. We're not trying to get them to click through to the website. We've mentioned that they can kind of explore if they want to. Maybe this goes to a retail catalog, maybe not. So in this case, I really consider this just more relationship building and onboarding. So I'm going to set this as a transactional send. My guess is that this is really being triggered just off of them, signing up, becoming a member, and this is really just acknowledging that relationship. For our audience type, again, your business needs are really going to dictate what that value is. And excuse me, I'm setting this as a data extension field. That's not what I want to do here. And maybe we do have that in our data extension. Maybe you've got a standard data extension that you're going to create from a framework, and you've got a send classification field there that you'll populate. My guess is that's not the case for most of these, so I'm going to set that by hand there. Audience type. So in this case, onboarding email, my guess is this is going to go to everyone, right? We're going to send this out regardless of whether it is, maybe an internal member who's registering for a program. Doesn't really, matter if we come back to our list here. Is this a member? Is it a private client, a wealth client, an advisor? I'm not sure that we're going to really, distinguish, who we're sending this to here. So in this case, this email may be going out to everybody, and maybe you want to have that kind of catch-all field here, just to say that this is all, in which case we can apply that there. I think the big thing that we're thinking of is that we really want to make sure that this is going to be usable across all deployments of this email. It's an email send level tagging system, so we want to make sure that we're applying it, to that deployment. Maybe this is an email that's only going to be sent to two particular subsets of that group, depending on the triggering mechanism. And in that case, maybe we would want to separate it out into this particular one is triggered to members, and this particular one is triggered to our wealth clients. So we do want to kind of be able to compare here. But in this case, I'm going to guess that this is really just kind of a more generic onboarding email, and it's just going out to everybody. Is test. So Jeremy brought that up. I think that's an awesome one to include. Just going to real quickly see if we can find the system string here. And for other folks who may not be aware of it, the AmScript guide is great for things like this. So I'm going to pull out the is test send system string. Populate that up there. All right. And then we've got our content type. So we'll think about, is this a newsletter? Is it a promotion? It's not. I think, Tim, one of the other values you had set out there was ongoing. And I do think that this would be an ongoing email. So we can set this to ongoing. Clean up our syntax here. Our goal. So is this a onboarding, cross-sell? Is this a lapsed, subscriber kind of that we're trying to recapture? In this case, I would say that this is pretty clearly an onboarding email. For our subscriber category, these going to prospects or customers. I would say that this is going to customers. These folks, have already kind of converted here. They're not just, lead generation at this point. They're already joined us, and we're just kind of acknowledging that. Send from name. So I think this one is probably going to determine or be determined by how you are triggering this email. So is this something that we are sending from our default values in a single send? Is this something maybe it's personalized? It's coming from a financial advisor, and we're using dynamic senders where we want to be able to populate that. And it's located in our data extension. So we really want to think about that at kind of send context. I do find that to be a super helpful use case for this. Just send logging in general is getting those resolved strings. You're not just going to see your profile strings, that percent from name in your reporting. You can actually see this email was sent from Matt or it was sent from Tim. And maybe we've got different engagement metrics with our content. So super helpful to be able to pull that. I'm going to throw in a data extension field here for the moment, because I believe we've got some of that architecture set up and we can support that. All right. And we've got SF campaign ID. So I think this is a great example. Tim, I'm going to guess that you guys have done some of this previously in your environment where we've got a campaign set up in Salesforce CRM. We can ingest that. We can synchronize that back over into Marketing Cloud, and we can build audiences using that ID string. I'm not sure that I've got any data extensions offhand where we've done that. Just to do a quick look into our hands-on here, see if anything jumps out. I don't think so. So I'm going to leave that probably blank for now for this example. But Tim, if we do have something that you know of quickly, happy to jump in there.
Yeah, I think that was a standalone use case, so I can't remember where it was. So sorry.
No, it's all good. So we may just want to have a catch-all again. This may just be something like non-Salesforce send or something similar. All right, and then we've got our system strings for our email address here and for our subscriber key. So at this point, I think we've got most of our variables covered here. I'm not going to make everybody sit and watch me do this for other emails, but what we'll do is as we break, I can create a couple more emails with a couple different combinations here of our tags, and we can do a couple sends. And then next week, what we can do is we can come together and start looking at the reporting part of this. But this should be good for our email set. So I'm going to leave this for now, and then we can create a new data extension. I think what I'm going to do is probably filter the one that we created last week too. So I know we had some bounces in that email just with our Trailblazer emails. So I'm going to reuse subscriber that I know was good. Yes, publication test send. Was that data extension I just pulled up good, Tim? That publication test send? It looks like you may have been doing some testing yesterday with that.
Yeah. Shoot. Huh, that's weird. I was, but I was sending it to a different publication list. I wonder if it just picked up that one automatically.
Good. If you don't mind, what I'll do is I'll just filter this based off your good
Sounds
email
good.
address. That way we just know that we're going to have a delivery here.
Sounds good.
All right, and we will call this reporting. All right, so we've got our good subscriber here. We've got our good data extension. So now what we can do is we can kind of look and test against this. And we'll do two. We'll do a test send, and then we can do a live send since we do have that Boolean, just to try to highlight that. All right, we are missing our send from information. So what we'll do is we'll clean that up real quick. And again, I think that's really great. So a good example, we use this for our data extension sends. And in this case, we don't have these values available in our data extension. So I'm going to do a real quick search just to see if we've got a way to capture that. I know we've got our like reply name and reply email address, so that might be retrieved from the sender information. Oh, yep, okay, and that's coming up here as well. All right. So I'm going to pull this back over from the AMP script guide. And we'll pull in our email address as well. All right, let's give that a shot. Looks like I've got the wrong one for email. Oh, no underscore. Okay. Awesome. All right, so we've got our test send ready to go. So we'll go ahead, we'll do a quick test. Let's see if we've got a good, just standard one here.
Yeah, the Cervelo next, I think is yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I like to prefix here with what my subject is, what I'm working on, just so I can keep these separate in my inboxes here. And I am doing Tim, I'm going to send it to you as well. Awesome. So we've got our test sends. An invalid email address. All right, so I'm going to send a test just to you that, Tim, I guess. We'll see how that goes.
I've seen that happen before. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Huh.
All right, so we'll send off our one here. Awesome. And then the same thing, we'll have our test send out. Let's do a quick look at doing one production send. So we'll come down here, we'll grab our Cervelo next. And back down to our hands-on data extension. Framework, good to go. We had a great discussion around publication lists last week. So if we want to decide on a publication list, we can. In this case, I'm just going to use the default all subscribers. We're going to hit send immediately. Schedule. Tracking, I think we're probably good. We'll apply our Boston Marketers group here. All right, we've got one targeted. Our onboarding email, just do our quick double checks, make sure that everything lines up, and I think we're good to go. Awesome. All right, so Tim, let me know if either of those emails come through. But in this case, what we'll do is I'm actually going to open up our send log over in Contact Builder, just so we can take a look and see how quickly that information comes through. I think it can take, up to an hour or two sometimes for these things to be populated, but it's not going to be something where we've got to wait very long, that's for sure. Not like it's going to be next day or anything like that. All right, so as we come down here, we'll go to hands-on, Boston Marketers Group. Nope, that's not right. Excuse me. We're looking for our send log. Taking us to the wrong place here. All right, so we've got 1403. So I think that's where we started with. So it's certainly not instant. Oh, it looks like, yeah, so we've got one here. So we can see we've got, what our sent from name was, sent from email, campaign ID we populated with that non-Salesforce send, transactional, let's go to all. And we've got our is test is false. So that's pretty cool. I think the one thing that we haven't seen yet is our test send. So hopefully that'll come through too with those same values, and we'll see that in just a minute or two. Not sure if that takes a little bit different time to go, but yeah. So we probably don't have time to jump into the reporting portion of this, which is good because we'll want some more records before we actually do start trying to slice those up and take a look at them and start comparing. But any questions on any of this so far from anybody in the group? Anything we want to see for our next session in 2 weeks when we come back together to talk about what do we do with all these results once we've actually started pushing these through our system? Nothing yet. Hopefully that means it was just well understood and not just everybody's bored. So I do think it'll definitely be a little bit easier to walk through once we have a couple more records here as well, and we can start playing with stuff. So for anybody who does, want to be a tester in this, please let us know. What we can do is we can include you in some of these emails. We can have some folks clicking, some folks opening, some folks ignoring stuff. The more records we get, the bigger that data set is, the easier it's going to be to start pushing this stuff back and looking at our reporting and start getting some great examples of how you can use this. Once you've actually started to build a data set. So. Awesome. Well, a little early, but again, I don't think we can jump into the reporting piece today. So if there are any other questions or any ideas for future topics, we're happy to talk about them. I think that is one thing. We haven't drawn up the promotional content yet, but I think we are hoping to have some sort of Halloween themed, bring us your Frankensteins for the next couple weeks. I know I personally, we'll start building a project and then I'll get a quick requirement tweak and then somebody else will want to add a feature. And next thing you know, your process is a little unwieldy. So I think we're hoping to gather some of those examples out from the community so we can all work on them together, once the holiday gets a little bit closer and once we're through these next couple sessions. So if you've got anything like that, please don't hesitate to let Tim or I know. And what we can do is get you on as a volunteer builder and we can all work through it together as a group.
Hey, Matt, I had a question for you about SendLog. In this example where our SendLog's pretty small. I'm sure your SendLogs are get pretty big. Do you do anything specifically as far as when you're validating in the SendLog? Probably maybe we'll get into that a little bit more next week, but as far as querying the SendLog and stuff like that, do you still use Contact Builder or do you, when you're looking to find those records and all of that, do you query it? What have you done in the past when your SendLog's pretty big?
Yeah, so I think the SendLog in general, I think best practice is absolutely to throw on retention settings in there. I think we keep our SendLog more often than not. I think it's about 10 days, I want to say, is the best practice. It might be 11 days worth of data in there. But you're absolutely right. If you're an enterprise sender who's sending a lot of emails, it's going to get very unwieldy very quick. So keeping that data set to a manageable size, I think, is important. And maybe you're going to be offloading, to cold storage or to a data warehouse or somewhere else if you want, real go backwards data. I think the other thing is that in terms of querying, absolutely, we can use Query Studio if you want to keep it within the platform. I know that's something that's really popular rather than kind of exporting lists and looking things up by hand. I do like Contact Builder just because you can search based off of a primary key if you've got one set up there. And then, querying is something that's really helpful. But I think to your point, does that help us validate? So if we're already querying and we want to make sure that we're catching all of our records or not catching all of our records, another query is helpful, but do you make the same mistake twice, I guess? So I do like looking through that in Contact Builder just to try to, click through it and look with my own eyes. But I think the important thing is that next week, as we start talking through reporting and what we're going to be querying is all those joins. And I know that there were a couple references to that in the chat earlier too. We don't necessarily just want to join on subscriber ID. We don't necessarily just want to join on job ID because we might have multiple subscribers in multiple sends, within that send log. I may send an individual 3 emails. So if I want to make sure that I'm trying to gauge the effectiveness of this onboarding email specifically, I need to make sure that I'm coming back and joining also on either my email name, maybe that job ID if I've got it. So if Tim has clicked on 3 different emails in the past week. I want to make sure that I'm measuring and reporting on that particular onboarding one. So we will absolutely get into that next week a little bit. Is how do I identify and how do I join on a concatenated key that I'm looking, one-to-one across instances. Sorry, it's kind of a sprawling answer there. Great question from Sita here. So how often are we creating a send log on our day-to-day SFMC? So really, you're only going to create one in your environment. Actually, I'm not familiar with how it works on a child BU to enterprise level. So that'll be a takeaway from me, Tim, unless you happen to know offhand.
Yeah, the couple examples that I've worked in, it's one send log
One send
for
log.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, so typically once you configure it, it is fairly permanent, right? I think you can get involved with support for custom engagements if you really need to. But once you configure it, you do want to be careful. And I think I mentioned that I believe you're limited to 10 additional custom fields. So really be judicious and think about that as we kind of create there. And then only one send can be triggered at a time. So we're not triggering sends to the send log. The send log is available and ingesting this data as your emails come out of Marketing Cloud. So if you're triggering a manual send and you've got your scheduled sends and your journeys are constantly firing, as you set these up in your email AIM script, and I'll come back to the email just for a second. As you set these variables, as the email is deployed at send time, these match the fields that we've created in our send log, and that's that mapping that's going to allow them to be populated. So the send log is always populated at send time with send information, job ID, subscriber ID, things like that. But by adding these additional fields and then populating them, we're also going to populate those additional fields in the send log. So it doesn't have to be one at a time. It can be a bulk job. It can be a million member promotional send, in addition to your ongoing journeys that are constantly rolling. So certainly not limited to one send at a time or anything like that. Question from Dharmesh about, do we have to ask questions on Slack channel? So we don't have a Slack channel to my knowledge. Tim and I are active on LinkedIn, and then I think of the Trailblazer community group as well. On those event posts, there's also a way to post like discussion topics. So if you think of something later that you're not sure about, you should be able to just click in that email, and there should be a follow-up email sent out after this session where you can post discussion topics, and feel free to just throw something there, and we'll certainly get back to you. Awesome. You are very welcome, Susan. All right. Well, there's nothing else this morning. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining up. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to getting into the output side of this in a week or two.
Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.